Well, you took this special trip, and I just want to start with, can you give us an overview of what that looked like for you and what the experience was like?
Oh my goodness. Well, it was quite an experience. I did Ghana in October, Kenya in November. It all came about from the standpoint of, as you said, heritage travel. One of the things with all of the things that I guess have happened in our world over the last couple of years, I think heritage travel, especially for people of color, has really grown. We are trying to, for some way, kind of heal some of the trauma that has happened to us over the course of time. And trying to, for lack of a better cliche, get back to our roots. We'll put it that particular way. And so going to Ghana for me was a very important step. I mean, the year of return took place, I think, in 2020, I think. And that was where, in large, they welcomed us back home, basically, back to Africa. And a number of celebrities, et cetera, took that opportunity to go back. And it kind of inspired a lot of people to start to want to go back. But it was very significant because, the door of no return is called the door of no return because as our ancestors went through that door, there was the thought, I will never return back to my homeland. And many of them never did. But during that event in Ghana, some of those slaves' bodies were brought back from their graves and are actually now buried in Ghana back on the soil. So it's almost like a rekindling of your spirit to say that some of your ancestors did return back home. And then for us to make the journey home, it really opens up the door even more that at least the children from those ancestors are, taking the doorway to come back home. So now the door is no longer the door of no return. It's a way for you to actually walk back through and come back home. So it's great. It was really
Did
great.
you learn anything new from this experience that you didn't know before?
Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, there really was a lot. I mean, one of the questions I've always had, and I think I've even asked my mom as a young child, et cetera, as the history in Americas is, as we all know, generally for people of color, especially African Americans, there's not a thought of African Americans being immigrants. And in all intent and purposes, we are immigrants as well, at least our ancestors were. You think about the fact that, as you said, with heritage travel, the big boom has been Europe, Scotland, Italy, Ireland, things of that place. Well, there's an African side of that as well. We need to learn our history, our heritage, et cetera. And more people in general, I think, have been doing the 23andMe, the Ancestry.com, et cetera. And I think even 23andMe and Airbnb did some kind of partnership to help with that as well. And we have not seen as much of the diaspora, if you would, of us going back to Africa per se. And it's an important piece because I did, like, to your question, I learned so much. I think when my question as a child was, why our culture, why our people were put through the horrific things that we were put through. Why us? I don't understand. And so that was a big question for me, even in the process. And so
Did you get that answer?
to some extent I did and that's one reason I say people need to make the journey or people of color need to make the journey, or anybody needs to make the journey to really understand how to put the puzzle together, because that helped me put some of those pieces together. And to answer the question, it was when I, in my mind, from the history books, from the American history books, the history we're told leaves out a big chunk. And so, at least for myself, the thought was, the British did this to us. Well, once I got there and really immersed myself in the culture and talked to the historians that were there, it really opened my eyes to say that some parts of it was just a normal part of capitalism and how things grew out of what was already in existence. And what I mean by that is, the Danes, the Portuguese, the British, there were multiple cultures, the Austrians, the Germans, et cetera, they went to Africa to reap the resources, the gold, the land, the oil, things of that nature. It was more about the money, the dollar, of cultivating those natural resources. And when they went there, as it would be in olden times, you're conquering things. So, you know, I'm going to war with somebody, I'm conquering their particular land. Those war prisoners may become slaves, etc. You know, some of that happens. Of course, even internally from the standpoint of African tribes, as it would be with Indians, etc., you have tribal wars. Tribal wars, you overcome a tribe, you take your prisoners of war, they become slaves to your tribe. Well, that was happening just as a part of how war took place. So there were some Africans that actually had slaves because of that process. Okay. Well, then as the Danes, the Portuguese, etc., came in, they conquered certain lands, certain areas of Africa. They conquered those that already had slaves. Therefore, they maintained them as slaves. And then those that they conquered made more slaves, so forth and so on. So it went forward on a repetitive basis with each of the countries, if you would, that conquered certain areas. But of course, as it got to the point where, you know, the African Americans were brought, or the Africans were brought to the States, it got to a point of true capitalism and understanding that the ability to really make, to grow the Americas, to really make it rich, as it were, was to have the work and labor of those that you didn't have to pay for per se. And here we are, we took, you know, these individuals from their home in horrific situations and took them back to the Americas for them never to return home. And so to your very first question, that story, that understanding helped me in some ways to understand that it wasn't just we went after you just for this. It was a part of, in some ways, not all of it, in some ways, it was a part of the natural process of warring and taking prisoners to some extent. I think it went another direction at some point, but that's kind of how it started. We'll put it that way. And so it was very, very educational, learned so much. It was very emotional. It definitely was something that pulls at your heart and helps you to, I don't even know why I want to say understand it better, but have a better view of the full picture. I'll put it that way.
When I was watching your pictures online, and so I struggled, you know, we've talked about this. Heritage travel, when I watched what you were doing, it almost didn't, or ancestry travel, those words didn't accurately describe to me what I was watching. And so when I asked you, I'm like, well, what do you call this kind of travel? And you were like, well, heritage, ancestral. And I'm like, but that just doesn't seem deep enough. This seems to be on a whole nother level than just like a genetic profile. And one of the things you had said to me in a conversation, which I thought was just kind of that jaw open moment, was, in the United States, we believe the history of the African American community started with slavery.
That's correct.
And that, like, right there to me says there's so much more to this than, so it's one of those things that you hate to almost put a label on, because it's so much deeper than I think any of us can even put into words.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, you know, I look at my DNA profile and the makeup, as it were, and yes, some of it from a genealogy standpoint, a lot of my people came from that general area. I mean, a lot of my percentage or a number of my percentage came from Benin, Togo, from Ghana, the Bantu people in that particular area. But then at the same time, I've got a very large portion that comes from Scotland. So, you know, you just never know. But so to some extent, it was understanding the history of my people from multiple levels, from a historical, from a genealogical standpoint, things of that nature. But you're right. It was so much more than just the genetics of the situation, but at the same time, very much about genetics to also understand that as a people, how strong, how resilient that we were and that we are, for all that we have come through and overcome. it's amazing. You know, I think about what the doctor just said about he didn't intend to go to be the first. He just ended up being the first. I understand that because, you know, unfortunately, as we talk about American history, we as a people have never been really seen as a full person per se, and it's written in some law books that way, that we're not seen as a full person. So I think it becomes an interesting history to say we were the first African American, or the first Asian, or whatever. Well, why was that so critical? That's just my thought. Why is that so critical? What made it such a momentous scenario for us to be the first that you saw there? If we were really a part of the population, a part of the people, if there was cohesion, if we worked together as brothers and sisters, no matter the color, race, creed of our nature, why would that matter? I'm sorry, I'm getting goosebumps, getting me excited.
No, like I'm totally into this. We could go on for hours. I mean, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Was there something that you went into this trip thinking one way and it flip-flopped for you?
Oh yeah.
Like you
I
had
think
this
that
pre idea of what something was, and
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I think if we think about it as an example, if we think about what we see on the news on different occasions, some of the documentaries that are done, et cetera, I think that a lot of us would probably go, everything in Africa is destitute. Every child is malnutritioned and looks horrible, and there's no Western ways per se, things of that nature. Accra is a metropolitan, beautiful city with beautiful hotels, with great people that dress very nicely in kente or whatever they have on. So, and the nightclubs, the restaurants, oh my God, the food, food was awesome. But the restaurants, the food, everything was just amazing. So, to your point, I went kind of with really not knowing what to expect. I guess that's really kind of how I say it. I wasn't sure what I was going to see. I had done some research, looked at some things, but again, I just wasn't sure. And I was pleasantly surprised at what I saw in Accra. But even when I went to Kumasi and to the eastern region and central region, oh my God, the land, the people, beautiful. And it also made me understand, or brought home even more, that you cannot classify someone's fortune and riches by a dollar amount or by an asset that they have or don't have. You cannot do that, because the people in these lands were so welcoming, so happy about just being alive, that you saw their riches in how they greeted you, brother, sister, no matter what you look like. Because in our group, we had multitude of races, creeds, colors, etc. And it was an embracing of you coming to the land and welcome home to Africa. No matter what you look like, they were welcoming you into the land. And no matter what your mind might have said, you know, for instance, we went to the Masi tribe, and I took video of how they live. Well, the first thought of how we live in America, and I don't think, in some cases, we would even say some of our homeless live the way that they live. But at the same time, they did not come across that in any way they were not rich in something. They had land, they had cattle, sheep, they had wives, wives. You know, the children were running around having a good time. I mean, you know, it wasn't what I would say my normal standards of living would be.
Right.
But at the same time, they were so rich in everything. They welcomed us. They were rich in their creativity and the things they were selling to us, etc. And they wanted to share their history, wanted to share how they operate, wanted to take you into their homes to see their homes, how they lived, how they did it. So that was really, that it just brought that home, that again, you cannot classify anybody's fortune and riches by any type of asset, whether it's
Right.
monetary or otherwise. You just can't.
Right.
You really can't.
Well, and it's important to know that. I know we experienced that when I took my kids to Thailand, and we
Mhm.
went kind of in, gosh, I can't remember. We were with our guide, and we saw different tribes of people, and from the long neck to,
Mhm.
just other tribes. And right, it's not the way I live or maybe want to live, but it's working for them, and
Yeah,
it's their culture, and they're happy, and this is the way it is. And so it's not a I need to respect, and I need to understand and listen, but no one's telling me I have to live this way.
that's correct.
They're
That's
living their way, I'm living my way, but let's understand and respect and learn about it. And I think that
absolutely.
was for my kids, that was so important for them to learn, because I think they came back with a greater understanding of
Yes.
others, right?
Well, you know,
No
just like we
one's
say
saying
with
you have to be
travel,
that way.
absolutely. I mean, like we say with travel, that's a large part of travel is opening your mind, broadening your horizons. Unless you get outside of that box, you will never have that understanding of how fortunate or misfortunate you are,
Mhm.
and same for others. You've got to get out and be able to understand the riches that this world has to offer, and the only way you can really do that is through travel. No matter your race, creed, or color, you got to do that, and you learn so
Yeah.
much about yourself as well as others. But even to your point about what I learned in Ghana, it brought home to me even more of an understanding of potentially other ethnicities, etc. In my trip there, I learned a lot about my ethnicity, but also I learned a lot about others and how we can or haven't or do come together at the same time. So it's a full circle learning. I mean, it really is.
I love it. And there's nothing else to say. That brought it all home. So thank you. Thanks for taking the time to share with us your experience. I am
Absolutely.
in awe of it, and I can't wait till the day where I'm able to experience something that was just as beautiful. So thanks for sharing.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.